is that number one is that this session is being recorded for people who have are unable to attend the webinar. You do have the panel there for participants. So if you want to raise your hand or ask any questions, please do through the Q&A channel. And finally, if you have any questions that you want to ask, please do raise it. There will be some polls coming through the webinar, which will, if you can respond to that, that'll be fantastic. All right, so let's begin. Before we begin, actually, just a few things about Learning Cafe and now Capability Cafe. I'll just walk you through a few slides about where we are, but before that, some introductions. We've got Gareth Murphy. Gareth has developed L&D solutions for some of the leading Australian and New Zealand organizations over the past 15 years. Gareth is currently a consultant in NAB's leadership and professional development team and has been bitten by the Agile bug and is trying out in the work that he does at NAB. So Gareth, welcome to the panel.
Thanks very much for having me, Vikram.
We also have Vikram. So Vikram has worked closely with me on projects, etc., but he really is a Scrum Alliance certified Scrum Master. He's also been a product manager for GE Healthcare and Philips Healthcare in terms of developing new healthcare diagnostics products through the Agile method. So plenty of experience there, and he does have a view into how learning operates and how learning solutions are developed. So Vikram, welcome on board.
Thank you, Jiva.
So as you can see from the list, we've got about 120 registrations from about 75 plus organizations now. So looking forward to your inputs because I think I see a few names in the audience that I know very well, and I know that they've got a huge amount of experience. So please do share your insights through the Q&A box, which we'll share with everyone. Okay, very quickly, kind of going through. For those people who really aren't aware of Learning Cafe or attending for the first time, Learning Cafe and now Capability Cafe is a community of professionals, one obviously focused around learning and the other Capability Cafe focused around capability management and capability professionals. Both these communities have a focus on kind of implementing ideas with a very practical bent of mind. So in a way that we kind of try to have a practical discussion around the hype and the noise and all the smoke that is there around different things that we're doing in L&D to come up with what's realistic. And we do this through a variety of means, including thought leadership, blogs, webinar discussions, unconference, blog magazines, catch-ups, and workshops. So, all of this is centered around building capability within the two professions, learning and capability. There are huge overlaps between the two, but that's what we try to do. Okay, so moving on to a few announcements. So we have just announced the 6th Sydney Unconference 2017, and this unconference, the theme for the unconference is fusion. So it's kind of the growing up of the L&D from being something that works alone into a sophisticated function that needs to and is integrating with capability, knowledge management, performance management, etc. And almost nothing nowadays done in L&D is done in isolation. So it's really the focus for the sessions will be around the fusion of the different disciplines or the sub-disciplines within learning to give responsive solutions to organizations. As usual, we'll have the best talent available from L&D around Australia and New Zealand. Plus, the format is going to be exciting as usual. It's all discussions and pretty much no presentations. We're also going to include hackathon in the session, so we're going to try that out this time. So look, it's limited about only 130 seats. It's been selling out for the past 4 years, so please do book a seat. It's going to be a fantastic experience, as we've received 4.15 out of 5 for all the unconferences in the past. So it's been very popular. So hope we'll see you there. We're also running a workshop which is related to the topic on hand, which is Agile for Learning Design. Now, we've run this for the senior learning leadership team for one of the big financial services companies, and it's been really useful in cementing their understanding of what kind of Agile is from a pure point of view, but also the interplay with learning, and especially the impact on the ADDIE methodology, and where it is judicious to use it and not. So if you're interested in the workshop, the details are on the website. The next webinar coming up is a Capability Cafe webinar, and it's around capability frameworks. So there are lots of organizations that use a lot of capability frameworks, a lot of money and time spent on that. But we're kind of discussing whether the whole concept of capability frameworks is a bit too onerous and a bit too slow for a fast-changing world. So business is changing, the skills required are changing. So is it really worth the effort in putting the effort into developing capability frameworks that might change the next month or in the next couple of months? More importantly, are they so over-engineered that nobody actually uses them and has very little impact on the processes? So we discussed that. We've got Miles Williams from Bupa, GM Capability Transformation, plus we're getting a few more. So we'll have a fantastic panel to discuss this, and we'll kind of dissect the realities of using capability framework. So just one slide about the Agile versus ADDIE, which was the last workshop. We had presentations from Angela used to work for MYOB then, Max from Optus, and Jenny from Suncorp, and they've subsequently kind of moved on from their roles into other roles. So I think Angela's kind of gone into more Agile roles. Jenny's moved into an HR role, but still using Agile. Wanted to join the panel today, but unfortunately had some work. So we will be the presentation recording and the slide are available on the links there, and we'll send across the links in the chat box if you want to access those. And there's some really good stuff in those presentations, but we're not going to cover them right now. So please feel free to go across and have a look at the slides. Okay, so I guess what I'm going to do is just share some. Share a couple of problem statements and also some of the stats that we have come across. So the first problem statement, which we will discuss during the course of this webinar, is ADDIE failing to effectively meet the new demands of learning, which needs to be more responsive, has less time, has less budget, and the half-life of learning is decreasing. So is Agile a more appropriate method for that? One of the survey questions that we had related to that particular point is, have you used Agile in learning, design, and development? So 46.6% have said yes, and 57.4% have said no. So, if that is a reflection of the audiences, audiences is so the design and development, there is a fair reflection of people who know about Agile and those who don't. Okay, so the other question is that 72% indicate that their organization is Agile ready or in progress, right? Which means that 44% say that yes, the organization is ready and is using Agile. About 28% say that it's kind of underway, and about 28% say no, they aren't using Agile. So again, a nice mix of maturity there in terms of using Agile in organizations. The second problem statement that we have is: does Agile apply to all projects and all stages of the ADDIE methodology, or can they be combined? And we'll be looking for some insights both from Vikram, who kind of comes from a pure Agile point of view. But the ADDIE, what are the points that ADDIE can be, can be combined? The question that's there is that 98% feel that Agile and traditional learning design approaches can be mixed either sometimes, which is 64.6%, or they can be mixed about 1/3, right? And very few people have actually said, only 2% have said kind of no. And that's a very interesting question that we need to answer, and we will in the next few slides that we'll cover. So we should have some kind of an answer there. The third problem statement is, does the effectiveness of the learning produced vary with the approach used for the design and development? So have you tried new approaches? So I guess there is just not Agile, but there are other methods available to accelerate the way that learning, design, and development is done. We'll kind of cover that. The question we also ask is, where have you applied Agile in terms of L&D? 58.7% said in online course design, and that's the bulk of it. 33.7%, and I think Gareth is going to talk to this, is about classroom course design, and 7.6% have said LMS processes. Now, this question is a bit misleading, I guess, because we only really gave these three choices, and I'm sure there are other places where Agile can be applied to learning and design and development, and I'm sure that we'll discuss those as we go along. So I think what I might do is I might actually just get the panelist in, and especially first to Gareth. So Gareth, just in terms of your application of Agile to Agile to the learning and development processes, which aspects of L&D have you applied it to?
Yeah, as you mentioned, more so in the classroom course design. But you mentioned early on I was bitten by the Agile bug, which was probably about 18 months ago. I think probably previous to that, if you'd talked to me about are you using Agile development in your in the way that you design and deliver your learning, I probably would have naively said yes, we are, because we feel that we are putting the learner at the center of what we're doing and trying to make learning more nimble and to get learning out faster. But it wasn't really until I was exposed to it, and particularly to some of the tools that we'll have a look at today or mention today, that it really gave me appreciation of actually taking some of the structure that comes from those Agile tools to be able to complement the way that we design learning. So if we talk about that dance scenario, I absolutely believe it is a dance between ADDIE and Agile. But it's sort of who's leading at any one time. I think there's also been a lot of conversation about, is Agile just another fad that's going to come and go, kind of like the Macarena perhaps. But to me, if you have a look at the benefits, particularly not only that there is benefits in the learning that you can develop, but what I'm really interested in more so these days is the flow-on effects and the benefits that you get from the teams and the individuals who are working in more agile ways, and we'll again talk a little bit more about that. But in the context of classroom course design, we've seen that it's just been able to, again, accelerate the pace at which we're able to work and work more collaboratively as well across teams and also across the organization.
Thank you, Gareth. I mean, that metaphor of dances is a good one. So, so what you're saying, it's a tango, not necessarily a face-off. Vikram, how about you? Vikram?
Yep.
Yeah, go for it. That's right.
So I come from an agile background of 8 years working in pure products. So what I've seen is the importance of agile is at its peak at the moment. There are companies adopting agile simply because now that they've identified that it is a really good way for product development. My application of agile in L&D has just been over the past 6 months, and I can appreciate where the L&D folks are looking to take agile. I definitely see ADDIE and agile as something that's synchronous, and they're not really talking two different things. We're talking the same things in a different language, and they can definitely work together.
Thank you, Vikram. That's excellent. So looking forward to your insights there, and I think we are going to hand it over to you right here, Vikram. Over to you.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Vikram. Sorry, next slide, please. So the handsome guy over there is me. My name is Vikram Vitrivel. I have about 8 to 9 years of experience with product development in a traditional agile approach, and over the past few months, I've been working closely with Jeevan to see how we could implement Agile in the L&D spectrum. But my focus today is going to be about some of my pet peeves in Agile and more about what Agile really is and what it is not. So to begin with, what is Agile not? Agile is not a shortcut to complete a struggling project faster. I've always told my folks that Agile would have probably had a better standing had we called it a watermelon, because people tend to misuse the fact that it's called Agile and assume that it's something that can be used to complete the project faster. So next slide. Next slide, Jeevan. You would have heard project managers say this before. We are an Agile team. Be nimble and get things done. That doesn't happen. Agile doesn't work that way. Agile works because it allows for iterative development. And the reason we need iterative development is because what we don't know in any project is always larger than what we know. And it is common sense, and it's a really good idea for us to account for that. Next slide. So let's talk about the two traditional approaches now, waterfall and Agile. In a waterfall model, the waterfall model comes from manufacturing, where you complete one part of the project and you hand it over to the next team. So one expert completes his job and hands it over to the next expert, assuming that the previous expert has done his job completely. This is what we call the faith-driven development. There is an inherent assumption that the product that has been handed over to you works. There is no consensus taken to see whether what is being developed is in line with what the customer finally wants. And that's where Agile comes in. Agile says, listen, the customer probably doesn't know what he really wants, and it might be a good idea for you to show the customer any little thing that you might have developed so that they can see whether we are on the right track. And that pretty much is what Agile is all about. It's about iterative development and constant feedback. So if you take a look at the graph on the right-hand side, so you do something for a week, which is called a sprint. You take that and you show it to the customer, and the customer says, yep, looking good. So you go ahead to the next sprint and start developing. So that's the Agile way of working. Next slide. So this graph is pretty much similar to what I've been talking about. 50% of knowledge gets lost in handoffs. So the logical solution again is to not have handoffs. So Agile suggests that you have a cross-functional team of people with different skills working together rather than in silos. So when you have all of these intelligent people in the same room working towards the same problem at the same time, handoffs don't occur. And in that way, we reduce the 50% knowledge loss that happens in the traditional waterfall model. Next slide.
Oh, Vikram, actually, I might just interrupt here and also get a view from Gareth on this. So I was kind of wondering if Agile is such a efficient way to work and produces good results. Just wondering, why did kind of waterfall originate and become so prevalent in the first place? Vikram, first to you, and then probably Gareth, especially with a view on learning.
So the way I see it is, when software teams started to arrive on the scene sometime in the 80s and 90s, we needed a model to follow, and it was all brand new. So we took a look at the manufacturing sector. Toyota's lean principle is something that we all know about. So we saw it working there, and we decided that, yeah, software can be done in the same way. It's, instead of making hardware, you're making software. You have a set of requirements, and let's follow it that way. So that's how it started, and that's where waterfall really comes from. You sign off on the requirements, you go ahead and develop the product, and then you hand it over to the customer saying, hey, instead of saying, hey, I manufactured your car, you're just going to say, hey, I manufactured your payroll processing software. So that's pretty much where waterfall came. And then after a few years, we realized that maybe it's not working too well. Maybe we need a different solution. And that's how Agile started to pop up. Jeevan?
Yeah, Jeevan, I think from my perspective, it's Gareth here, the waterfall approach, and if I think of L&D traditionally, the idea that there's a brief or someone asks you for a piece of learning directed at a particular audience, that end goal is defined at the start, and then it's just work back from that, figure out your time frames, and this is what you need to deliver. I think where Agile is challenging us is that perhaps we, even though as L&D professionals, I'm sure that we all try to put the learner at the center of whatever it is that we're developing, but sometimes we can feel like we have all the answers up front. And what Agile, for me, challenges us to do is to just test those assumptions that we have and not sit back so much trying to develop and as Vikram was saying, one expert handing off to the next expert, because that does take a lot of time. And how many times have we spent so much time and effort on pieces of learning, and then when we finally reveal that we find out, we could have known earlier about some of these things that maybe are inhibiting some of this learning, and we have to, maybe roll some things back. Agile gives us a way of being able to test those theories a lot sooner, and it brings the learner back into the conversation so much more.
And Gareth, I think we in L&D kind of become a victim of assuming that we are kind of experts for what our learners want, and we don't necessarily need to talk to them. So just wondering if you have any views in that, because Agile again kind of brings in a very customer-centric view. What's your view on that?
Yeah. Look, I think it has challenged us because I've worked in L&D now for around about 15 years, and I think when I first started off, particularly starting off in a large organisation as I did, it was at that tipping point when we were moving from traditional corporate training, which was very much just focused on the content and pushing it out to learners, and you better absorb this, or it's your own fault if you don't, to moving into accepting more adult learning principles and being curious about how that affects the learning. So there was this real big evolution of how learning showed up in larger organizations, and I guess we were very envious of smaller organizations that could design and develop things quickly and get to their audience fast. What I think has happened, though, is that, we probably have rested on our laurels, because we have probably felt like we're the advocates for learning in the organization, and whether you're in a large organization or a small one, that sometimes you're the lone voice about the learner experience in here. So maybe that's, I guess, given us this false sense of security around that, saying, well, we're the ones who have to advocate for this. Agile's challenging us to say, we'll just go back and check that consistently with the learner, and to bring them into the conversation in a meaningful way, bring them in earlier on, and sense check whatever it is that you're designing and developing with that audience, so that you don't get to the point where you spend so much time, effort, and money into something that just doesn't land, and the feedback that you then get, initially from, your first pilot that you go into is the kind of stuff that would have been really useful to know way back when you first had that idea.
Thanks, Gareth. That's a pretty good view, and we'll cover that in your slide. So I'm going to hand it back to Vikram with the slide on Scrum Team. Interesting graphic there.
All right. So the word Scrum Team comes from football, where a team of guys doing whatever is shown there is called a Scrum Team. So they're all fighting for the ball, and they are fighting as a group. So we are fighting towards the same goal, to produce the same software, to produce the same L&D work that we do. And we are doing it together. Each one of us have different skills, but we are trying to put them all together to try to solve the same problem. Hence, we are a Scrum Team. Next slide. All right, this looks a little overwhelming, but just hang on with me. It's pretty simple. The good thing about Agile, it's completely common sense. So what this slide is talking about is the life cycle of a sprint. A sprint is when you start working to when you show the small development that you have done in that week to the customer. So it's a period of about 1 or 2 weeks during which you've done development. A product backlog. So let me step back. Agile works on something we call user stories. User stories is another word for a requirement other than the fact that it talks about the requirement from a user's perspective. So, for example, my new joinee needs to undergo training so that he is completely up to date with our HR processes. So instead of saying we need a learning portal where HR processes exist, you're talking about it from a user's perspective. You're saying who the customer is, why he needs it, and what the reasons, how it benefits the company. So that's called a user story. It's just a fancy term for a requirement. Now the user stories are put together in a product backlog. A product backlog is a prioritized list of user stories based on importance to the product. And then the Scrum team, as I've already described to you, is a cross-functional team which works on these user stories. So that's pretty much what this slide is showing. The Scrum team goes ahead and consumes user stories and starts completing them one after the other. Next slide. So the other part of Agile is the Scrum ceremonies. I'm not going to go into in-depth about what each of these are because that's a whole webinar by itself, but just know that within a sprint, all these different meetings happen. Agile emphasizes that meetings need to be reduced, documentation needs to be reduced, and work needs to be done. But even in an Agile world, these meetings are important. But the good thing is none of these meetings go more than half an hour. The daily stand-up probably lasts not more than 10 minutes. So we'll probably go into each of these ceremonies in a different webinar, but let's just know that these exist. And to conclude, I'll talk about what the Agile Manifesto is, where Agile comes from. This really is the backbone of Agile. So next slide. So what the manifesto says is iterative design over big front-up design. Because when the project starts, you don't really know what the final product should look like. Work on it in chunks, work on it in pieces. It's better that way. And instead of writing lots and lots of documentation about how something is going to be done, experiment and do it. That actually takes your product closer to the final deliverable. And talk to your customer. The customer probably knows what they want much better than your intuition. So as much as possible, if you can get customers' feedback at many different points in your product development, the better it is for the product. And collaborative work over a single hero. So everybody in your cross-functional team is present in your team because they're good at something. It's imperative that we tap into their expertise and are able to allow each one of them to shine so that ultimately the product is as good as it can be. So that's about it from me. It's just a very high-level overview of what Agile is. And thank you. I'll hand it over to Jeevan now. Hello? Jeevan, back to you.
Thank you, Vikram. Thanks for that. So look, we're getting a lot of questions through the Q&A panel, which I'm passing on and responding to some when we get some time. So please do, ask questions and respond, and have a look at some really valuable inputs that are coming from the audience. And also, Saeed is sending some links. He sent some link to the Agile Manifesto, which we'll share very soon, which is, kind of, I guess, the manifesto itself is a little bit different, and we'll send a link, to that. But I think, Gareth and also to the audience, I think the one thing when I looked at the Agile Manifesto, sure, it's about work, a different way of working, in an agile manner. But I think it was more around creating a culture, creating new rules about how work should be done, including some that actually don't fit into traditional top-down organizations. So I think one of the things that we discussed, Vikram, and like to get your views, Gareth, is the fact that, you kind of set up a team with the right people, as Vikram said, and then you kind of leave them alone, trust them to do the right thing, and trust the outputs they come up with. That's number one. Number two is actually provide them with the support and allow them to take risks. So, Gareth, your view on, to really work in Agile and have that the right environment, and I guess the lack of supervision that usually is required in or part of a top-down organization. How do you see that working in traditional organizations?
Yeah, well, I think it's absolutely a journey, and what Agile gives us is some tools to be able to allow the organisation or the people within the organisation to feel comfortable with some of that, letting go of that traditional top-down hierarchical bureaucratic approach to the way that we develop work, because it's all nice and well to say, we want people to collaborate more, we want people to, cross-functional teams, and we'll let you get on with that work. But in reality, it's really hard to allow that to happen. And what we've found is that by using some of those tried and tested Agile tools, it allows the team to be able to appropriately chunk through the work. Just like, ADDIE gives you a framework to chunk through what you need to do and when you need to do it, that allows the organisation and the people in it to better adapt to this. And I think to Vikram's point, there's a lot of people running around saying that they're Agile and that they're using an Agile approach, and what they're really saying is, I'm just trying to work faster. Well, we're all trying to work faster and get things done quicker. But what you won't find in I guess, an Agile approach is less work, because you still have to do the work. You're just doing it in different ways and perhaps using different tools to get to that result. So I think wherever you start as well, because again, and I'll probably talk to this directly, is that within our organisation, and we've used Agile within the NAB for around about 10 years, that there's been teams, particularly deep inside technology, that have worked on pure Agile projects. There are people who are Agile purists and probably look at someone like me who's sort of come to the party a little bit later on and tried to take different aspects of Agile and incorporate it into the way that I already work. They probably, some of them look at me and say, well, you're not doing it right. I kind of feel like, well, there's probably no right way to do this. We're making it up as we go along. And the tools, and also, I guess, sharing with others who are doing similar things as well, has made a lot of difference to just talk through what's worked and what doesn't. So I think that in that sense, that as an organisation, we are starting to change it. I see that you've got the slide up there, which is really for large corporates like which I work in. Our traditional way of looking at work was very siloed, and even to this day, and the way that work is distributed is often through a manager who again has either come up with a brilliant idea or been given a brilliant idea by his boss to say, go away and implement this. And we might come together as a team and we'll talk through those pieces of the work, but then the way that work is then divvied up and allocated is then very much siloed again. So I might very well sit next to a person who's working on different aspects of this project, but I have no line of sight on what it is that they're actually doing, and I'm really not that concerned with it, because as long as I get my piece of the puzzle polished up and okay, I can just then throw it over the top, and they can do with it what they want. And what we found from that is that, and particularly in large organisations, and what we, I guess, in large organisations envied about smaller operations, is that the roadblocks that we come up against, we bump up into each other's work, and I can't believe that you're working on something that's pretty similar to what I'm working on. How does that happen? Well, it happens because we're just stuck in our own silos. What we're trying to move to, and I think many organisations and many, even solo operators in L&D are trying to move to, is to far more collaborative ways of working. The pictures that we've got on the slide there represent some of the activity that we see around our organisation. And I mean, there's been a concerted effort, and Agile is just one piece of the puzzle, in my opinion, to this, but over years to build more collaboration across teams, to have people working together rather than being siloed, and to not have these really big long timelines on things, and go live dates that are months if not years out in front of us, where it sort of gets us sitting back into a little bit of complacency, and very focused internally as well. Very smart people paid a lot of money coming up with the right answers for things. And for me anyway, Agile's been a way of really bringing to life that conversation and giving us some practical tools to be able to use to make that a reality. I do want to acknowledge, though, for, I spoke about the Agile purists who would say sometimes, you're not doing that right. If you've got a sprint, your sprint's got to be 1 to 2 weeks. What are you talking about having a sprint that might be 6 weeks long? It has to be done this way. I'm sort of of the view who knows what the right answer is, but if you're getting the results, if you're finding that you're collaborating more as a team, you will come up with better learning solutions for people. I think when Agile's done badly, though, it can create mistrust because people just see it as an excuse for people to not do as much, or just maybe throw things over the fence half finished. It can be just an excuse for not following a process perhaps at times, and we hear a lot of that as well in our organisation. Also, what we're finding, particularly in large organisations, is that as teams start to adopt more Agile processes around what they do, so it's no longer pure waterfall approach, it's not pure Agile, it's sort of, we start to call it a bit of a Wagile approach, is that some teams work at different speeds, and you again have a different type of problem where you bump up against each other, because you might have a team that is starting to work a lot more together as a unit using some of those Agile processes, but they still need to get pieces of work done by other teams who just may not be there yet, and we need to slow that process down because you need to come into sync with how we do our things. So we haven't solved for everything yet, but I guess our approach to it is that we experiment with it, and we have the permission to be able to do that, which is great. Some of the mindsets for agility, and I mean, all of these are things that I think intuitively L&D people have incorporated into their practice for many years. What I find really interesting, though, and I think that the light bulb moment for me around how Agile can really be a useful approach is that, particularly around some of those points of transparency, collaboration, innovation, that the Agile tools give you a way in which you can bring that to life with a bit of structure, rather than just saying, we're just running a huddle and we'll just wait for innovation to show up.
So Gareth, can I just kind of interrupt, because we're kind of getting some questions about how can you put it to practical use. So just in terms of just wondering if you've got any examples of for example, classroom design. How have you been able to apply Agile to this, and how it looks different from the previous process?
Yeah, look, maybe if you go to the next slide, Jeevan, I can talk to that, and that'll bring into that conversation some of the actual tools that you can use. the tools or the Agile practices there that I believe anyway, or the ones that we've started to experiment with within our L&D context are listed there. And if I just go through those and maybe just draw on a few examples of what we've done. So the idea of self-organizing teams, and we've talked a little bit about that and being able to just let a team go off and do what they need to do. I think as L&D people, and look, if you're in a larger organization and you do have a lot of people around you, to Vikram's point earlier on in the slide and on how those sprints or how those scrums organize themselves, is that you really need to clearly define the roles within those teams of what the specialist activity that those people bring, but also that they bring so much more, and there's so much more opportunity for people to learn and develop themselves about different disciplines. So I think in our world, you know, it's not just about the work being carved up and here's the things that we need the instructional designer to think about, and they might go off and talk to SMEs in isolation of everything else that's happening. We start to think about it of how can we get really early on our designers, our facilitators, our delivery people, even the coordination people into the room. Maybe if you've got people in digital that you're relying on as well for technology, whatever that looks like, how can we bring them into the conversation very early on to start to get them to flesh out the kinds of things that we need to think about to solve the problem that we're trying to solve. And that moves us to that next point. We've been running minimal viable discovery sessions, which is again basically getting those people, the right people in the room.
Can I just interrupt, because you know we ran a poll kind of saying, you know, how much of Agile do you know? So there's about 96% of the people who really don't know Agile or are pretty new to Agile. So, you know, some of these terms might be, I think we do require a little bit of, you know, kind of introduction. But I guess, you know, if you were to take a typical kind of a learning design journey, like ADDIE, where do these kind of come into play? So you kind of, when you start the project, do you have the, you know, the self-organizing teams that then start developing the minimum viable discovery, which is essentially like I think the minimum product that you can get away with?
Exactly, and look, I think it really depends. It's totally dependent on the context. But how we've tried to approach it anyway is that you get a request of build this or there's a need for this. Very early on, we try to get what we would term a self-organizing team involved. Is let's identify the people that we need to get on board to make this happen. And very early on in the process, asking some questions within that, what we call that minimal viable discovery, about what is it that we're trying to solve for. And I think, again, it's some of the conversation that as L&D professionals we've intuitively had, but it's just formalizing that. So that might be a half-day workshop. It may be longer than that. But essentially what you're trying to do is to firstly frame the problem. So why are we doing it? What is the vision? What will success look like? And getting those brains in the room that are going to help to flesh that out. We then want to understand
Can I just interrupt to say, when you say brains in the room,
sure.
What kind of brains?
So the brains in the room is, for me, is those self-organizing teams. So I think in an L&D environment, it is getting your instructional designers in the room, and not maybe thinking of just the ones that maybe are allocated this work traditionally, but thinking wider than that. Your delivery people, your coordination team. If it's something that's going to land in a particular part of an organization, you can bring the SMEs in at that point as well. It's for us, it's about trying to get as many brains in the room as we can to flesh out an appropriate solution and get something started.
Thanks, Gareth. And I think one of the questions they're asking and probably want an answer to more than anything else is, where in ADDIE can Agile be used? So my experience has been that I think it's the analysis and design part where you can really kind of use the Agile principles to maybe come up with the the end product of that is obviously a storyboard and the development specs, right? But before that, you're already kind of building the minimal viable product, which is kind of a prototype or proof of concept or whatever, and constantly showing to your audiences and your stakeholders. So what's your view on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the analysis, absolutely. And I think all we're doing, we're asking the same questions that good instructional designers have always been asking, but we're trying to do it in a more collaborative way. What it's trying to do is flesh these things out faster. So in my experience, you're given a piece of work as the ID, and you step through it yourself, and maybe you do run a few meetings along the way to with key stakeholders, with facilitators, with coordinators to try and flesh these things out. What we're saying is running something like a minimal viable discovery session, which again, could be a couple of hours, could be a whole day, is get everyone in the room that you think will influence this learning, that opinion is worthwhile, and flesh it out at once. So that you're really, I guess, putting that analysis phase on steroids to start off with.
Thank you, Gareth.
The other thing that we find really useful within that minimal viable discovery phase is that once we start to get some, I guess, some bones and a bit of a skeleton around what the learning could look like, we start to group those into user stories. And again, Vikram talked about those earlier on, but they're the requirements of our learning, but flipped from the perspective of the learner. So using statements around, as a learner, I want to be able to, and it might be, understand a particular process, or it might be, again, something about the way in which you deliver that learning. As a learner, I want to be able to have the choice between a face-to-face and a virtual workshop. But it's about starting to put a skeleton together of what it may look like, and then using some of the agile processes around the prioritization and the planning of that work. And as I mentioned earlier, this was probably the biggest aha moment for me around the benefit of Agile, is that by doing these processes, and we don't have time to go through them now, but guaranteed, if you jump on Google, if you're not familiar with some of these terms, there is some great information out there on how you can do this yourself. But what we're doing is as a team, and again, working back to that self-organizing team framework, is that how do we all get across each other's work? And by going through planning and prioritization together, it helps us to understand all of the moving parts of this and start that process of solving some of these collaboratively as well. From that, we take what we've discovered to start a story wall or a visual management board. And this just really helps because it continues the conversation. It gets it visible. Again, it stops us from running back to our desk and just getting focused on our own computer and our own work. If we have a visual management board or a story wall which is dynamic, and it has to be dynamic. If you're just throwing a whole heap of stuff up there and you never go back to it, revisit, it's just static stuff, it's not going to be very inviting for others to drop past and have a look and get interested in what you're doing, and you'll soon lose interest in it as well. But the story wall becomes a pivotal point because that's the natural place to start your stand-ups that you would have around that project or whatever it is that you're working on. I'm just thinking from the context of someone perhaps working in, you're the only L&D person, or perhaps, you work for others to develop this stuff, is that how could you bring some of those elements into your work as well? So we've seen some people do some pretty clever things with virtual story walls and also portable ones. So, just grabbing yourself some big card and creating a bit of story wall that you can take around with you to tell the story of what it is that you're trying to solve for. The other key piece for us has been developing those personas, so learner personas. So if we're delivering a piece of learning to a particular team, that we do spend some time to meet with those people, run some focus groups, run a couple of meetings to extract information around them and build some personas which give us the critical data around what types of things are these people looking for in the learning, right down to the just the logistical parts of this, what time of day best suits, etc. I think there was a question earlier on from Paula, and that tension that's between, bringing the learner in and trying to, meet all of their needs. What we've also found over the journey is that you need to take it all with a grain of salt, because you ask a question of 100 people, when does learning best suit you, you're probably going to get, at least 50 different answers, and that can leave you a little bit more confused. Really what we've learned to do with that is to just incorporate it into the design, and it might force us to ask some more questions of that audience perhaps. But those personas and then from those the learner journey, so really being clear on, where does the learner first start interacting with this type of learning, what do they do with it, mapping that out so that we can then again keep putting ourselves in the shoes of those learners, again fleshes out some of the things that we want to flesh out to make the most effective learning. And those last 2 points is really how we keep bringing people back around whatever it is that we're developing. So running regular stand-ups. So I guess the purists would say, once a day we start off with a stand-up. That hasn't always been practical for us, and I have worked on a project where we did do daily stand-ups. Initially, it was I felt like, well, what are we going to do every single day? But it only took about 2 to 3 weeks before we hit this tipping point where it was just critical that you showed up to those stand-ups, because it was just so much value in that 15 minutes. It's not a team meeting. It should be, let's connect in with the work, acknowledge where there's any roadblocks, and if there are, we need to take those offline to then solve for them. And those last 2 points around running some showcases and some retrospectives, no matter where you're at or what you've tried with Agile, showcase is a really good way to start. Is whatever it is that you're developing, bring people into a room and show them what it is that you've created, and don't build another PowerPoint slide on it. Show them, let them experience. If you're building activities, run the activities and get that instant feedback. And then as a team, run a retro after you've done that, which is just simply sitting around and fleshing out what did we learn, what would we do better, what needs to be changed before we again go back and start to develop again.
Thanks, Gareth. I'll kind of move on to my slides. Look, I do want to share a story about involving, I guess the learners or the customers for us. Is in one of the projects a few months ago, I was helping organize a media organization design an onboarding module or onboarding training, and we asked the learning people what should be in the content, and all of them said, look, we need a video from the CEO, kind of the inspirational speech. And then what we did was we actually went back to the learners. We, surveyed 50 to 60 learners saying, what do you want from onboarding? And none of them said a video from the CEO. All they wanted to know was, how do I get my laptop up and running? Where do I contact for different things? What are the things I need to know, the minimal things? So it was quite interesting, to then exclude the CEO's video from the onboarding, because that's the done practice. But there was hardly any of the learners who wanted it. So just an illustration of how just involving the customer can get you close to what really will be consumed, rather than trying to guess that. So I'm going to now move on to my slides, and I guess my experience with Agile is kind of coming from, I guess, 4 different things that I've been involved at the moment currently. So at the moment, I'm just doing some work for Westpac, helping the team there in terms of making whole of Westpac, Agile. So we're kind of just looking at the challenges and, how to create the culture, and if it's possible to make everyone and everything Agile in Westpac. So that's kind of the implementation, angle. The other one is that at the moment, kind of using our own methodology with, and we're helping one of our, one of the consulting partners do a LMS selection for a healthcare services company. So I'm going to share some from that. The other one is that Vikram and I recently ran a one-day workshop for Agile for learning for a financial services senior learning team. So we've kind of got insights from there, and I'm kind of using all that I've learned, helping up set up a biotechnology company. So nothing to do with learning, but kind of applying Agile. So it's something that been using a lot. Love the principles, love the approach. I hate documentation, so the Agile is much more natural in terms of visuals and taking pictures of what's on the board. So I think the answer, if anybody's looking for one, is that there is no perfect answer for using Agile. The closest I've come to is that if you do, there is a place for Agile and there is a place for ADDIE. Both, can be combined because it's practical to do so, because not everybody's Agile trained, for example, right? So let me just go here to the next slide, which is actually McKinsey's slide on what is actually required before Agile can be used. And you can see there are some pretty big changes required. For example, the roles and responsibilities, to from one where there are very specific roles to where all the roles are integrated, to even the budgeting process, right? So where you kind of the yearly budgeting is you fix a certain amount and then split it across different projects, to a more flexible style of budgeting, because we know that a certain budget is allocated for a project, and then we try and fit a solution into the budget. Sometimes you require less money, but we still end up spending that money. Sometimes you need more money and there is no money, and you compromise on the solution, right? So there are bigger things that need to come into play to really work in the Agile way. The next one is really important. I think we need to have a look at this slide. Conditions for Agile. So this is an article from HBR which I found really useful. Again, the article claims, as all things in life really, that there's no perfect answer. So there are conditions that are favorable for Agile and unfavorable for Agile. The link is down there if you want to have a look. So really worth a read. So what we're saying here is, kind of the innovation type, if you look at that. So they're saying that Agile is perfect where the problems are complex, the solutions are not known, and the scope is not clearly defined. So you don't know what you're doing, and you form this, start shaping the solution as you progress through minimum viable products and showing the product back to the customers before you move on and getting their feedback. Where it is unfavorable is that similar work has been done before, right? So it's a process that's kind of being repeated, right? The specifications is all clear. So, I think in the ADDIE part, the analysis and design can be a bit unstructured and chaotic, and where I think Agile works really well. But when it gets to the development, part, I think there is where, it's maybe not a really good fit, right? So that's in my head. I kind of think that the Agile approach can be used for the initial part of the ADDIE process, but after that, especially because if you outsource a development to somebody else, or the teams that are developing the projects are kind of working on different projects, so they're not actually able to form a team. That needs to be kept in mind. There's also the impact of making mistakes, customer involvement. So where close collaboration, rapid feedback is feasible, and the requirements are kind of not clear. But if the requirements are clear, right, it has been been done, or the customers are not available, they simply don't have time to participate, then it might be unfeasible. So you need to have a look at the I guess the conditions for where it is feasible and not feasible. I am aware that 96% of the audiences may not be clear with some of the terms that we've used in Agile, but the reality is those Agile, once you look into those terms, they are common sense, right? They're just I guess a technical term for some of the things that we do already. So I want to share with you, and just checking time very quickly, in terms of application Agile to another thing, which is LMS selection, right? So this is a project that kind of involved in the usual process is that a company says, I want an online system, let me go hire a consultant, we'll do a big requirements analysis, do a spreadsheet, selection criteria, put the points, get responses to the RFP, collate everything, and the best person wins. So this is something that really isn't working anymore, because there's a new world of the LMS, which is that most LMSs really are very close in terms of what the features they provide. the SaaS model in any case restricts the customization you can do, right? And the contracts for LMSs are yearly or even can be turned on can be turned off next month. So if a solution doesn't really fit, you can turn it off. So it's not a huge risk. Plus, the pricing is competitive. There are new vendors in the market, and also a realization that for example, a huge HR system may not be required for learning because there are point solutions in the LMSs that work very, very well and provide the depth. And also a realization that a company with e-learning and online learning grows in maturity. So when you start off the journey, you need something simple, and you can progress to a more sophisticated LMS as you go along. So the method that we've used, basically, we try and get all people in the room: IT, finance, L&D, HR, even some learners into a room to build consensus around the requirements and the importance of them. We try not to go and have individual discussions, because all it does is that it gives an individual point of view, but if you have the same discussion in a room, people balance off the needs, right? And then once we do that, we start almost building an LMS system with the information that we've gathered during the workshops to show something tangible, because if you're an organization that isn't used to an LMS, you really don't know what you want, right? So unless you see something which is kind of a minimal viable product, you can start giving feedback. So we go for rapid iterations of using any LMS. It doesn't matter, because we say the LMS selected will be different. So they actually see the progression. And look, again, I want to use terms in the next slide, but essentially they're very simple processes that Agile has. For example, planning poker is essentially a prioritization exercise. We've also got the $1,000 experiment, which is that everybody's allocated $1,000, and they're asked to put the money on the requirements that they think the organization needs most. So everybody puts their money, and the requirement that has the most money is the most important, right? So once they have seen a living product, we can then kind of finalize the MVP requirements, give it to the vendors. They come back and show us the customer journey. So we don't ask them to show 1,000 features, because only we know that only the top 20% is used anyway, so no point saying that. So we tell them, can you show us the journey of classroom registration, or how an online course will be launched, or maybe how a report will be generated, right? We kind of focus on that. And it's got, huge advantages in terms of, the ownership, the focus on the learner experience, because all of a sudden, by looking at the solution, the people in the room actually see what the learner will experience, and sometimes it's a bit over-engineered. So look, that's too much. We need to really simplify it. So it's a process that we've used for LMS, and I think we are finished because we're short of time. I think, look, Agile is a huge thing. You really need to spend some time. We've got a one-day workshop which only covers so much. You can get certifications. So I think this is where we'll leave. I'd probably want to thank the panel, and if you've got any questions, please do send us through an email or your feedback, and there's a poll for you to respond to. In a way, this webinar we pivoted a little bit, but because once we got the feedback that 96% of the people didn't know much about Agile, we I guess had to change the focus. That's I guess Agile in a way. Otherwise, we had content presented which probably wouldn't have made too much sense if we had just used the term. So, Gareth, before we finish, a quick word from you, and then Vikram, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Look, nothing more to say other than just you've got to start somewhere. So jump online, have a look at some of the content that's available out there, but definitely talk to others who are involved in Agile as well. There's plenty of meetup groups to do that, and just start a conversation. And yeah, thanks for the opportunity to share.
No worries. Vikram, over to you. Quick word.
Yeah, guys, don't get fazed by the complex words that we use in Agile. It's really common sense. It's just fancy words for simple things because we like to make it sound very formal. So, yeah, go to YouTube, go to any online resource, learn up, or you can even join one of our one-day workshops. And, yeah, thanks for participating.
Look, thanks everyone. Again, we've tried to fit in a lot more in 1 hour, so hopefully it's been worth it. Would appreciate some feedback, and hopefully we'll see you at the next webinar and at the Unconference on 23rd February in Sydney. We also have one in Melbourne later in the year. So thanks everyone, and hopefully we've got something useful from the session. Thank you.